A lot of times I think the best ideas are divine, and
Yep.
there's some greater universe, some greater energy that you're just tapping into. But I also find for myself, it's only when I'm open, when I'm present, when I'm all there that I can tap into that energy and that insight. If you have kind of a hard edge and you're ruling from fear, then also other people don't open up to you. And then you don't get their genius. You don't get their ideas. You don't get their energy.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Business is Human. Today, we have an awesome guest who I've been fortunate enough to meet for a long time, or meet a while ago, rather, through the Chicago Ventures Network. Godard Abel, the co-founder and CEO of G2. Godard, what's up, man?
Yeah, great to be here with you, Scott. Really fun, and been fun to get to know you over the years. You've been scaling troops up.
Yeah. It's been awesome. I mean, when I first found out about G2, I remember thinking, wow, this makes a lot of sense. The way that I shop for everything from restaurants I go to the auto mechanic that I use. It's all related. The choices are effectively made by other people and the voice of the customer. And that just has increasingly become an important paradigm in software purchasing. And frankly, even like what company you decide to choose. And so you guys are really changing the power structure for everybody from buyers to people looking for jobs. And I just think it's absolutely fantastic. For the people that are listening that may not be as in tune with G2, maybe you could give a quick, just kind of elevator pitch of what you guys do.
Yeah, and Scott, you said it really well in terms of being inspired by consumer sites like Yelp. And when we first started G2 back in 2012, we said, hey, let's build a Yelp for business software. And I've been a software entrepreneur now for over 20 years. And as a software entrepreneur, I think I always saw how hard it was for our customers to discover, apps. And my first company was Big Machines. It was a configure price quote app. And I do remember meeting one of our best customers, ultimately Rolls-Royce. And this was their big turbine division. So they truly made big machines. And ultimately, we helped them configure those machines, sell them more online. But I remember what they said to us when they found us. They're like, oh, wow, we wish we'd heard about you 3 years ago because we've been trying to develop this software in-house. And so I think there's always been a massive discovery problem in business software, where business people know they have a problem, but they don't know what app, what software can best help them solve that problem. And there's so much innovation in our industry, as you know. On G2 now, we have over 100,000 different SaaS and software products listed that can probably solve just about any business problem. But it's hard to find the right one. And that was really our goal with G2, make it more like shopping on Amazon, where you have peer reviews, good search, and just a much more consumer-like experience to find the best apps for your business.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes both ways too, right? Because we've seen it as a business side of things. Like, it's funny, we're living in this world now where we have all these people, just from a marketing go-to-market perspective, that are just shooting arrows at companies and hoping that it hits, right? I hope that you have a problem that I solve, and then at this moment in time, you're looking to solve that problem. And then companies have this kind of, they're taking opportunistic demos that may or may not actually align with what they need. And I imagine a world one day where buyers and vendors can be connected seamlessly at the right time, where there isn't such a inefficient way of I'm just thinking about all these SDR teams, right, that are constantly just hoping that they land at the right message at the right time, to that more seamless connection. Like, I think that is going to be the future of the way people buy software. And you've obviously probably thought a lot about this, but
yeah,
you seem to be in a great place from an infrastructure perspective.
Yeah, and we're trying to exactly enable that as well, Scott. You're right, for the software seller. And I've always been a software entrepreneur, a software seller. As you said, it's really hard to figure out, hey, which companies right now need my app, right? Which of them have this business problem that I solve right now? And you're right, traditionally, it's just scale up more SDR, more BDR, more outbound, more emails. But I think with G2, you can do it much more intelligently because we do also offer software sellers like yourself buyer intent data. So you at Troops could see, oh, is this company already running Salesforce? Are they running Slack? And are they maybe searching even on G2 for better collaboration, apps that, or they're looking for sales assistants. And then a nice thing is we can make it much more like consumer again, where I think consumer shopping is amazing, like on Insta, like somehow, and, we're spending the fall in Colorado, but somehow like on Insta, they know that me and my family love to ski. And so I'm getting, offers all the time for new skis, new ski jackets. And frankly, it's a bit creepy, some people say, but it's super personalized. And like a lot of people, you end up buying a lot of that stuff. And we want to bring that same experience to B2B, where instead of getting annoying BDR outreach, you're like, oh, wow, I have no idea how this company knew I needed this app, but they're pinging me at just the right time. Thank you.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I actually like the Instagram ads. It's the first ads in my whole life I've actually liked because it helps me discover cool new indie brands that I would just never know. And it is a little bit creepy how well they're like, wow, Scott like wanted a new pair of gym shorts. I maybe I said that conversationally somehow and they picked up on it. But I actually enjoy it. And I think that is a benchmark and standard that companies like yours should strive for. And it's cool that you're thinking about it this way.
I would say in some ways, like Troops, like yourself, really starting out, right? You're kind of like that indie brand. You know what I mean? Like compared to like a Salesforce or a Slack, who we obviously partner with and connect. But I think you're right? And if we can help, and that's our goal, right? Help the software buyer discover that. And obviously I know what Troops does, right? And it is super valuable because we've had that challenge like many companies where our reps like to be in Slack. Sales leaders are like, hey, I need everything updated in Salesforce. And you guys obviously bridge that. And I think you guys are getting more and more well-known. You actually have 259 reviews now on G2, I see. So more and more customers, but that's always super hard as an entrepreneur at the beginning, right? How do you get people to discover your great new app? And I think we are excited that, we're helping more and more companies like yourselves just make that easier, right? Help you connect with that buyer at the right time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as we think about from a marketing perspective and go-to-market perspective, like especially during the current world that we live in, we are just doubling down on voice of the customer. Like customer, we're just finding that the easiest way for us to get into accounts is by leveraging all the love that we're getting from customers. And you guys are a part of that story. Referral programs are a part of that story. Great content and case studies are a part of that story. But I just read the content creation or category creation book by Anthony Canetta, who at Gainsight, and this was their playbook. It just works, and I think it's only going to become more important.
Now, it does warm my heart that also I think you're confirming it's focusing our industry on customer love. And probably the best example of that also this year, and probably the most entrepreneur of the year, arguably, Eric Wan, the Zoom founder. And, he spoke at our G2 conference last year. And I think his mantra has always been deliver happiness. And, deliver happiness to first and foremost his customers at Zoom, but also to his employees, his investors, and even talks about himself. But he's always at Zoom really focused on the customer delivering happiness. And I think that is what put him in such a great position, and I think you can see that he has over 40,000 reviews. People love him, but I think he's also an entrepreneur that also takes to heart the negative feedback, because we all know this entrepreneurs, we don't always make our customers happy right away. And so I think then also being open to that feedback and learning, and, he's obviously a brilliant engineer. So when he gets negative feedback, and he said he personally reads every negative review, and then he figures out, hey, how does he code? How does he make Zoom even better? To make that pain go away. And I do think that's why when obviously, and I would have never guessed how much success Zoom would have had this year, where they really got ahead of companies even like Google, and I think it was all because they were so focused on customer love, customer happiness. And I do think it's the modern way to really grow a company.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I remember being at a HubSpot inbound conference, and the main message that Brian Halligan was talking about is that your existing customers are the biggest growth channel. Yeah. Like the net retention, if you don't have that figured out as a business, you're just putting things into a leaky bucket. And so you need to figure out how to build your product and the messaging in such a way that creates these evangelists and that makes everything infinitely easier. But I wanted to shift gears because so it's funny when we were kind of connecting earlier. One of the people on your team had mentioned some of the books that you're working with, and the book 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership has been something that's been recommended to me by a number of friends. I keep seeing it, so I'm like, okay, this is a sign that I need to read this book. And they talk about kind of the Eric example. I think is really fascinating because it talks about kind of this idea of living from fear and being protective and trying to validate your ideas and thoughts versus approaching every situation with kind of openness and curiosity. And, I think that example with Eric is such a good one, where it would be really, really easy to get defensive when people are negatively talking about what you do. What are some of the things from that book and just the whole Jim Detmer conscious is way of thinking that you've tried to infuse at the company at G2?
Yeah, no, and I am a big fan of Jim Detmer and conscious leadership. And it's really, I think, helped make my life better. I also believe it's made me a better entrepreneur. But I was very lucky. Actually, I first met Jim, I think, way back in 2008. And I joined an organization called Young Presidents Organization in Chicago.
Sure.
Where I was building my first company, Big Machines. And I joined this peer YPO forum, with 8 fellow company leaders. And they, to my luck, they were already working on their consciousness. And this was really before Jim had even launched Conscious Is and before it was even a movement. But I was just lucky, and I wound up hiring him as my personal coach way back.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You knew before everybody else did.
Well, I was just kind of lucky, thanks to my YPO friends who recommended him. And frankly, at the time, one of the most interesting stories, I remember I met him for breakfast, in the Chicago area before I will end up hiring as my coach. I remember I asked him the question, I'm like, hey, so Jim, how am I getting an ROI from this? And really, he just kind of sat back and just laughed.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. And even back then, frankly, like his services weren't cheap, and I'd been trained more like as an engineer, an MBA, and a consultant. So normally, like all those instincts would say, well, if there's no hard ROI, I'm not buying it. But I knew there was something greater there. And so I took the leap anyway. And then I think what I realized as an entrepreneur back then, like I had so much anxiety. And my first company, Big Machines, felt like a storm cloud in my forehead. And even when I was with my wife and kids or my colleagues, I just, that storm cloud never went away. I just had so much fear and anxiety and had so much fear my company was going to fail. And we went through some hard years until we found success. And I remember my first father was my first investor. And I was always like, I had nightmares about losing his money. And then I had recruited my best friends from MIT to work with me. And I'm like, oh, and my fear was like, oh, I'm going to lose my dad's money. I'm going to ruin my friends' careers. And I'm just going to be a failure. And I lived with that fear for so many years. And then what I really learned from Jim and conscious leadership, and he always started with just meditation and breathing and like just breathe.
Yep.
And I remember when I first did that with him, I'm like, the anxiety went away. But honestly, I just felt tired. I'm like, Jim, like if I'm like this president, I'll never get any work done. Because I was using that fear and anxiety to fuel myself and to but it felt like forced. Where I'm like, well, I'm going to overcome that fear by just working harder and doing more. And it was kind of working. I mean, the company was succeeding, but I wasn't happy and I wasn't fulfilled. And I don't think I was as effective of the leader as I could be. And then I've been working on it ever since now, 12 plus years. And I still work with a conscious leadership coach. Her name now is Sue Heilbronner. And I have her not only work with me, but now what I've done at G2 for the first time, she works with my whole leadership team. And
that's huge.
Really making conscious leadership part of our whole leadership culture and philosophy.
Yeah, that's so critical. And I'm so glad you talked about that state that you were in when you were doing Big Machines, because I think a lot of people glamorize the whole starting a company thing, and it really is scary as shit. Yeah. And especially when you're coming from a place of trying to control and arrange everything around you, versus kind of working with the flow of life and energy. And it's just a totally different paradigm shift that you make eventually, I think, or a lot of us do in entrepreneurship. And as we kind of, try to better understand ourselves, And for me, what I've learned, or one of the big things that has been so interesting for me in my own journey of self-development and entrepreneurship, is that thinking, fear-based mentality actually really clouds you from creativity. And it's really in the place of pure presence and awareness that the best ideas come from, which is so counterintuitive to what we are taught by our culture, that it's, exactly what you said, like work harder, read more, consume more audiobooks. Like there's no ceiling on information intake and bettering yourself with the technology available. But counterintuitively, I'm learning that that's not necessarily, it's helpful, but not necessarily the path to the best ideas.
Yeah. No, and I think a lot of times, I think also with conscious leadership, I've learned a lot of times I think the best ideas are divine, and there's some greater universe, some greater energy that you're just tapping into. But I also find for myself, it's only when I'm open, when I'm present, when I'm all there, that I can tap into that energy and that insight, both from the universe and also from my team.
Yep.
Because I think also the other challenge you have as a leader, if you have kind of a hard edge and when I was doing this, when I'm ruling from fear, then also other people don't open up to you. And then you don't get their genius. You don't get their ideas. You don't get their energy. And then you have to do it all yourself. And it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And sometimes an entrepreneur feels like that, like, oh, why can't anybody else do their job, right? I'm just going to do it all. I'm going to carry the whole team on my back to success. And then, but then eventually you break down, right? And
yep.
So I think that's the wonder of consciousness, conscious leadership, that maybe it doesn't have to be so hard, right? Maybe you can unleash everyone's genius, creativity, and actually make much more progress much faster. And you yourself are doing a lot less.
Yeah, it's so resonant. So resonant. And one of the things that I realized is the difference between kind of relating to the people that you work with on the level that they're at. So a lot of times someone will come in and they'll share an idea about what they think a strategy should be. And maybe you don't like the idea or whatever it is. And I think the old way that I would think about a lot of these scenarios was really focusing on the content of the conversation versus where is this person coming from that is posturing this content. Like if that person is coming from fear and afraid to make a mistake, of course they're not going to suggest a new novel, like more 10x concept or idea, because they're afraid to fail. And that's kind of the matrix that's driving their decisions. So yeah, I mean, this stuff, it's very powerful on an individual perspective, but I think, as you've mentioned, like from a collective and the ecosystem around you, it's exponential.
Yeah, for sure.
So Godard, it seems like when you talk about big machines and your experience there, that it was a pretty formative experience for you as an entrepreneur. And I'm just curious, you're 8 years into building G2 now, 8+. I'm curious, what type of takeaways did you take there and implement the second time around to make sure that, things went better?
Third time too, right?
Yeah, well, Steelbrick, we kind of built in parallel to G2. And for about 4 years, I made that my day job. And luckily, I had a great co-founder, Tim Hindorf, who during that time became the CEO of G2 and did a great job leading the company to the next level. And then I kind of had a chance to come back, after Salesforce acquired Steelbrick. So it's kind of been a unique entrepreneurial journey. But I think in terms of, what are we doing differently the second or third time as entrepreneurs? I think it did start with, one, the conscious leadership. I already mentioned that. And I think my first company, Big Machines, I started working on for myself. But I think the difference now is really making part of the company and enabling, training my whole team on it, giving them all coaching. So I think that's one big learning. And I think the other one is being much more conscious about culture from day one. Because when I started my first company, Big Machines, I was about 27 years old, and I think it just felt like a lot of adrenaline, excitement. But I honestly didn't really know what I was doing, right? And even like culture, I'm like, yeah, whatever, And ultimately, I think a lot of people say this, also true that as the founders, usually the company culture is kind of how you show up. So in that sense, we ultimately, I think, built a good culture, but we weren't conscious about it. Whereas a second company, I met this entrepreneur, Chip Conley. There was a Stanford entrepreneur reunion. Chip spoke, and Chip had written this book called Peak, all about applying Maslow's peak pyramid to building a business. And I found that very inspiring. And Chip had built this hotel chain in the Bay Area, Joie de Vivre, with a really unique culture. And he really talked about with Peak how you can create inspired employees, evangelical customers, and proud investors, all by building a very heart-centered, love-centered, caring culture. And so when we started G2, we all read that book and we all agreed, wow, Peak is a great inspiration. And so Peak was really the foundation for how we defined the G2 culture and how we still define it today.
That's awesome. I'm excited to read that book. It sounds really, really interesting and aligned with a lot of the things we're talking about. And, I think the point, it's funny, I'm listening to you talk about your journey, and I feel like I'm like, on my first company that I started with frenetic adrenaline, and I'm like, man, I can't wait to do this again. And next time I'm going to do all these other things that are going to make it way, way more fun and easier. And by the way, probably more successful. But the other thing that I think, really important lesson that I learned was that is very analogous, and I think probably valuable for a lot of the CEOs and young burgeoning founders is, I feel like there's a tendency for exec teams, myself included, to maybe like one person wants to go hire an exec coach, or maybe, I remember my co-founder, Greg, had read 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership like 2 or 3 years ago. And what ends up happening is, because people are intaking different information and not simultaneously, you don't have a common language that you operate off of, and a set of belief systems. And, with my exec coach specifically, I stopped working with her because it was clear that like me operating in a silo was only going to be so effective compared to her getting involved in, across the team, the company goal process, all of those things. And I think the same goes for like a lot of this self-education and learning. And so the takeaway for me is like, you just get so much more leverage on any of those type of investments when it is a collective investment that involves multiple people making the same decision versus different people operating in a different silo with, as a result, a different shared language and understanding.
Yeah, no, I think, Scott, that's a great point. And I totally agree, right? You need one language, one framework across the team, because then it becomes very additive, right? And so I think, the more you can do that and align as founders, as leadership on, hey, what is your philosophy? Write it down, agree on the language. And I think also one great example of that was also Mark Benioff. And I got to, after he acquired Steelbrick, I was on his extended leadership team. And he's always been super thoughtful about writing things down, starting with the V2 mom. And part of that is always writing down and explicitly explaining the vision, the values to every employee. And he's been doing it at Salesforce since day one. And obviously every year he reflects, writes a new V2 mom with his leadership team. But I think he does an amazing job of that, always aligning everyone around the same language, the same framework, the same goals. And I think also the bigger a startup gets, and you probably are seeing this with Troops as well, as you get bigger, like that becomes a little more important because, you hire new people. And at the beginning, frankly, culture is easy, right? Because probably for like your first 10, 50 employees, everyone just knows each other. It can be very informal. But then as you start scaling, if you don't write it down, if you don't have a common language, it does tend to fall apart.
That makes a lot of sense. Cool to hear about Mark Benioff. The book about Salesforce, and the first exposure that I've gotten to the V2 mom. And then we had a bunch of Salesforce execs join Troops and actually did it ourselves. And it's definitely one cool goal framework. A question I had for you is, so, I agree that when you're open and curious, when you're open and kind of operating in that, what they call in the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, above the line, that is when, unique genius, divine thoughts, like direct knowing, whatever you want to call it, kind of arises. But I find it to be very hard moment to moment where you get into these conversations or debates or things about that trigger you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately kind of put you out of that state. And as a result, you no longer have access to those type of things. How have you found anything to kind of consistently help you remain open throughout the day to day and the hustle and the freneticness and the craziness that often our environment tries to create that can disrupt that?
Yes, I would say conscious breathing. And this is something I think Jim and the conscious leadership coaches all also train on, and I think, and the key is just to notice when you're going below the line, when you're triggered, and your body always gives you signals, right? For me, I feel rage, I feel anger, feel your neck tightening, and I'm an 8 in the Enneagram personality type, so I go to anger when I go below the line. And so it's easy to feel. And then having the awareness and the presence to be like, oh, okay, feeling angry, let myself feel the anger, but then go back to just 4 conscious deep breaths, and then usually can shift back to presence. And I think even the best gurus, including Jim himself, right, they still get triggered, they still go below the line. And I think what they always say is just being aware, having a self-awareness, and then they talk about the shift and the drift, or the drift and the shift, sorry, but you drift below the line, then you become aware, you breathe, and you can shift back to presence and consciousness and to being open to everyone's divine intuition and gifts. And but I'm always still working on it because I have to admit I've never had even a perfect day where I'm not triggered and below the line sometimes.
Oh yeah. Well, we have all been there. That is for sure. So how are you, that your team is remote or distributed, as is ours, as is most companies right now. And it's making everything a little bit more difficult from a culture perspective. I'm talking to a lot of founders right now. I was on the phone with one of my friends last night who, runs a Series C company, and he said it's end of the year. Everybody's feeling pretty burned out. He can feel it. He feels it. I mean, are there any things that you guys have done at G2 to help continue to help people be motivated, inspired, excited about pushing the company forward, despite the fact that, a lot of us are probably at home in our sweatpants, moving from our bed to our desk every day, to get the job done?
Yeah, we have found what we've done that's been working is really doubling down on our communication, being more authentic, being more transparent. And so one of the things I started doing this year that I probably wish I'd done a long time ago, but every 2 weeks, I send what I call a peak chronicle, but a detailed update, written, everything that's going on in the company. I also had a video. I share that via Slack. I share it in our Confluence. So a lot more communication. And then the other thing that's really working is we've also have a G2 community leader now, Kirsten Powdrill. And under G2 community, we've formed a bunch of employee resource groups around different themes. Like we have a Latin group, we have a LGBTQ group, we have, about we have a parents group, we have a dog lovers group. And then, periodically and obviously right now it's virtual, but they have their own Slack channels. They all meet, and probably at least once or twice a month, we do an all hands session where we just feature one of those groups, let some of those team members tell their stories. And we found, have those kinds of community activities, employee resource groups has really helped everyone stay connected. And obviously the digital tools, I think, but I think that's probably the easier part. But I do think, using Slack, using Confluence, using these digital platforms more, using Zoom, does help. But I think, more communication, more openness, and more embracing of the different communities in the team we've actually been able to increase our ENPS, our employee engagement score this year, and something I'm very proud of. But it's taken a lot of conscious effort.
That's a really big achievement. That's definitely not an easy thing to do. And I like to hear, I like hearing the fact that you send some videos sometimes because, it's funny. I know this because of Troops and all of the G2 reviews and some of the feedback we get that sometimes when an alert comes in that says, hey, this SDR booked a meeting, and the CEO or any exec chimes in and says, hey, congrats, that one little micro moment makes such a big difference to that other person, right? And just, it just makes a big impact. So, but I'm also curious to hear how you're thinking of things from a business perspective, right? Like, what are the things that you're really monitoring very closely today? And more specifically, how are you getting the information you need?
In terms of what we monitor, I think metrics. I mentioned one of our most important metrics is ENPS, but we do use the V2 Mom framework that I learned from Mark Benioff, and we redefine that for the company every half year, and then we launch an all hands kickoff meeting every half. But I think that part of the V2 Mom framework, as you probably know, is also identifying your key metrics to determine, or your key measures to determine, are you progressing on your key methods, on your key initiatives? And for the second half of this year at G2, we made invest in diverse talent number one. And we measure that by ENPS. We measure it by INPS, which is our inclusiveness score. So not only do we ask how engaged do you feel, but also do you feel included? Can you bring your whole self to work? And also feel proud we've brought our INPS up to record levels. And we also measure productivity then, of our team. So is our team, because we also believe, hey, if they're in their zone of genius, if they feel included, if they're engaged, they're also going to produce the most output. And so that's, our number one method. And then our number two method is, delivering more customer success. And which also means, we measure that by NPS. We have reviews of G2 solutions, of course, on G2. And we also look at, what's our net retention, what's our revenue growth, because we do believe, ultimately customers vote with dollars. And so, that's the second big method and the measures we use. And the third big method this year, we also shifted to smart growth, because like a lot of companies, especially at the beginning of the year, we were quite concerned it was going to be a deep recession. So let's make sure we're more efficient and we can get to the promised land with the capital we already have. And so that, we measure by how much ARR growth do we produce for each dollar we spend. And what's our operating cash flow? And one of the things I'm proudest of in Q3, we actually had $1 million of positive cash flow for the first time ever. So we were also really able to make progress on smart growth. And so that's, at least what we're looking at right now, Andrei.
That's amazing. And just real quick, in terms of the intent, I just want to give you a shout out here. I was looking at HubSpot on G2 and reading some of their reviews, and probably 15 minutes later, I got like 4 phone calls from SDRs from some of their competitors. So it's definitely working.
Yeah. So that's interesting. And one thing I did also want to refer back to with video. We do also have video reviews now. Because like when I look back at your Troops page, you have a nice review from an Abby who, says nice Slack integration, excellent customer service, but she says it in words. And I do agree with you. Video communications now, I think do really help, right, to kind of mix up the work from home monotony.
So how exactly does that work though for the videos, right? Like, cause I did notice that and I love it, right? It makes such a massive difference to see the person speak about it. But in terms of incentivizing people to leave video reviews, are you guys doing anything specific to like juice those numbers up and kind of like, train that behavior?
We do. One, we hope it's kind of nice social validation. Like I think the Abby R, who's featured the number one top review on Troops right now, like hopefully that also helps her professionally. I think a lot of people want that. They want to share their expertise. They want to share their knowledge with the world. So I think there's that intrinsic reward of being recognized for your knowledge and your expertise. So I think that's a prime motivator. And we do also provide rewards and incentives as a thank you, because to record a video review like this does take some time. We're all busy. And so, and sometimes at G2 will provide Amazon gift certificates, or we also like to partner with philanthropies, where the reviewer can also make a donation to a charity of their choice if they prefer that. And so there's, I think, also different ways to thank reviewers for taking the time. Of course, you can't tie it to whether it's 5-star or 1-star, but you can reward them for taking the time to leave a review. And ideally, it's always an authentic review. And something we've also discovered with the data on G2, companies that have 5.0 stars actually don't really do that well. Ideally, you're somewhere around 4.5, where, obviously the majority of users really love it, but you also have some 1-star reviews because that's what allows you to trust the rest, because no company is perfect. And even Eric Wan at Zoom, who's probably the best at delivering happiness, has maybe 200 1-star reviews, because every once in a while, all of us have a bad Zoom experience, right? But then he has 50,000 5-star reviews. And so I think that's the important point, is to make sure it's authentic.
That is true. When I see when I see all 5 stars, I'm like, wait a second, something's fishy here. This person just had all their friends do these. So that's awesome. Well, let's move on to the lightning rounds where Andrei here is going to ask some just quick fire questions that will help everybody get to know you a little bit better.
All right, let's go, Andrei.
Awesome. So this one's probably one of the favorites on the show. So what would you say was the biggest inflection point in your career?
It was early on. I was a consultant at McKinsey, and I remember my engagement manager, John Perlisi, just said, "Speak up." And that was my first job out of MIT. So I was kind of like a nerdy engineer, and I do all this great analysis, but then I wouldn't share the insights. In the meeting with the partners and the client executives, I'd just be really quiet. About a year into my career, he's like, "Just speak up."
I love that. What do you think is a really underappreciated skill, professional skill in tech today?
I would say it's empathetic, conscious leadership.
Fitting for sure.
Sensing a theme.
Well, what is a secret passion of yours that you haven't, that is not empathetic leadership?
AT skiing, all-terrain skiing, which means you put skins on your skis and you climb up the mountain before you ski down.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. What is something that you don't understand well right now that you'd love to better understand in 6 months?
The quantum duality of the universe and how it affects everything.
I feel like you and Nick Mehta got to from Gainsight, the CEO, got to link up because we talked about everything from the Enneagram to quantum physics on that episode. And so I feel like you guys, myself included, have some shared common interests.
Yeah, and I do know Nick, and he has some great reviews on G2, but no, he's a great entrepreneur as well.
That's awesome.
What is the kindest thing someone's ever done for you?
I already mentioned it. I honestly think it was that career advice, because that was just from John, telling me to speak up.
Godard, it's been so awesome to have you on the show. This has been really cool for me because a lot of the things you're talking about are just so top of mind. And I think just imperative for business leaders globally to start to understand some of these concepts, especially based on what's happening in the world now and where we are from a planetary perspective. So I think, you're doing a great job leading by example. And I'm really thrilled that we got a chance to talk about this today. And I guess for those people that want to, get involved in all the G2 amazingness, what should they do? Go to the website, start leaving some reviews. Do you guys have a blog, a podcast, anything people can check out?
Yeah, I would say just go to g2.com. And we do have, obviously, if you're researching software, it can obviously be helpful, but we do also have a great Learn Thought Leader blog, so if you want to learn about the latest smart tech, sales tech, please do come to g2.com and check it out.
Well, thank you again for coming on today, and we look forward to seeing everybody on the next show.
Thank you, Scott. And one thing I did want to say is I think I'm glad to see you as an entrepreneur discovering a lot of this earlier than I did. And so also look forward to seeing where your entrepreneurial adventures take you.
Thank you. I truly feel so blessed for that. So it should be fun, and we'll definitely be in touch.